Hi, students. So this lecture has two goals. I'm going to try to keep it short because it is the first week. The first goal is to direct you to um, points of reflection for Antigone. And the second goal is to go over the syllabus with you. So what I want to do is start with Antigone and then get down to sort of the practicalities of the class. Antigone is written by Sophocles, and Sophocles is considered to be one of the great voices of Athens. He's a playwright, but as you'll see as we continue on and read Plato, the Greeks used plays, especially plays, but also other kinds of literature, to communicate philosophical ideas and to sort of play with them. In Antigone, what you have is the story of a sister who is caught in a really difficult place. She has one brother who led an insurrection against the city and another brother who defended the city. They both die. One of them doesn't get buried. And in ancient Greece, the lack of a burial was the highest dishonor. If you look at Homer's Iliad, for example, when Hector's body is dragged behind the chariot by Achilles, this is an affront to the gods, an affront to basically all of humanity. It is not what you do to another human being. And so Antigone is the daughter of these two the sister of these two politically prominent men. She is the daughter of Oedipus, who Sophocles has written about in other plays, and he was the former king. And the new king, King Creon, is the one who is really sort of laying the law down in saying that her brother who led the insurrection cannot be buried. She decides that it is her job not to obey the law of the city that Creon is making, but to obey the higher law, she says. And that higher law is some sort of law that is known by reason in the nature of things. And so Creon can say whatever he'd like, but her moral obligation is different from what he says. And in this case, the natural moral obligation that she is reasoning to is that all that she has an obligation to bury her brother, regardless of what the law says. Another thing that's happening here that is really important for the contours of ancient thought is role-based reasoning. So what do I mean by that? Antigone is coming to the decision that she is as someone's sister, in addition to being a member of the city. And she thinks that this gives her certain starting points for how she reasons and certain obligations. And Ismene, her other sister, doesn't necessarily think the same, which is an interesting point of conflict. Creon is going to think that his role as a king requires certain kinds of behavior. And one of the things that I think is important to take away from ancient thought is that for us, reasoning has a kind of subjectivity. Role-based thinking isn't subjective thinking. It's the idea that there is some sort of order in life and you are placed in a role. And that role has a function in the order of life. So Creon has a function as king. Antigone is going to have a function as sister. And these roles can come into conflict, especially based on what justice requires in those roles. the point that Sophocles is making is that there is a kind of justice that is more than just human justice. It's more than just what we decide the law is. And Martin Luther King is actually a good person to imagine in conjunction with Antigone. And it's his day today that we remember him. So I bring him up here just because it's an easy and timely example. Segregation might have been the law. His argument is that it is not moral and that there is a moral standard for the law. This is the same thing that's happening here. There's a lot of interesting questions you can ask about persuasion rather than force, about rulers becoming stubborn and not listening to those who give advice. Some people think that Antigone was too harsh on her sister Ismene when she says that she is the same as Creon. The front of your work here, and here I'm switching to the syllabus just to begin, is that this week you are going to practice writing a summary of secondary literature. Since this is a graduate level course, I expect you to read these texts, but I want you to also read experts on the text because that's really important to you understanding the text and also being conversant in the text. So this week, what we're going to do is look at a piece called Politics and Man's Fate in Sophocles. And your job is to be able to summarize this for me in 4 to 5 pages. You're going to do the same thing next week. Read a primary text and then read a secondary text and write a 4 to 5 page summary and turn it into me. After that, the structure of the class changes and becomes a little bit more complicated. So the way that this works is you have 4 main texts we're working with, 2 from ancient thought and 2 from medieval. Plato's Republic, and I want you to get the edition by Alan Bloom. Nicomachean Ethics, which is Aristotle's work. City of God by Augustine, and Aquinas's Treatise on Law. You don't have to buy the entire Summa. It's like really big in multiple volumes. I just want you to get the Treatise on Law. Each week, we're going to read from a part of those texts and focus in on that part and its subject. Then I'm going to assign a piece of secondary literature on it for all of you to read. What this means for your assignments is the following. And remember, I'm talking about after the first 2 weeks of class. You're going to be responsible for reading secondary literature. All of you are. But then I'm going to have you sign up for different weeks where you are sort of the star explicator of what the secondary literature assignment is saying. And if you sign up for that week, what you will do is you'll write a secondary literature summary, like you did for me the first time, where you're summarizing the argument and you're reflecting on it a bit. You're going to get to choose what you sign up for. You're probably going to have to sign up for twice, 2 different slots. I'm going to put it on the discussion forum for you all to sign up. Okay, if you sign up for that week, that's your responsibility. If you didn't sign up for that week, your job is to write a secondary literature response, where you take what you've learned from the secondary literature that week and you engage with this posted essay that this person has put up for you in the discussions to basically show your comprehension and engagement with the secondary literature. So every week let me just to go over it again. The people who signed up to be the secondary literature summarizers will post to the discussions board a link or an attachment that is their essay, and then everybody else will be responsible for responding to it in the structure of the forum, in the format of the forum. In addition, every week, everybody, regardless of if they've signed up for secondary literature summary, is going to have to write a reflection paper. It's just 2 pages. It's a topic of your choosing. So like, here's an example. We're not writing a reflection paper for Antigone. But if I was going to write a reflection paper on Antigone, I would write something like, my question would be, why does Ismene see herself, I mean, why does Antigone see Ismene as complicit in Creon's evil? Is she right to see this according to her own understanding of the law of nature? That's just an example. And it doesn't have to be very long, but I do want it to be tight and textual. So I think that does a pretty good job. When you are looking at the structure of the full class, one of your biggest things is going to be your final term paper. I expect you to have a consultation with me on March 8th about what you plan to write on. And then the draft is due on the week of March 29th, the first draft. And I want you to turn in a draft because the grade is important. We don't want you to make any big mistakes that will later be a problem for your final grade. You're also going to have an oral exam around the midterm. And I think that you'll find that that's fairly easy. It's just a conversation around the text of your choosing. I'm not too worried about it. It's an opportunity for me to get to talk to you. And it's only 15% of your grade. So those are the things that I think need explaining when I reflect on the syllabus. I'm going to send out, well, I'm debating between sending out a calendar of dates and just using the calendar function in Canvas, just so you have a concentration of what your most important targets should be. I put in a warning about not using gradebook to calculate your grade. You're graduate students, so you probably are not the same as undergrads, but I still wanted to put that in there. And I talk about, my preferred assignment structure. I reserve 48 hours to answer an email. I'm normally faster than that if it's a question about the course that is eminent, but I reserve that sort of cushion of time. I do want you to feel like you can email me with your questions, though. I think an online class depends a lot on communication, especially a class like ours, which is asynchronous. And because of that, we're going to need to be able to be responsive with each other about what isn't clear. Or if you have a problem, like if there's an emergency. So, I guess this is kind of formal. When you're looking at your online module for each week, you're going to see basically links to where you need to go, and normally a lecture from me on the subject, and a list of what you need to do, what your readings are, but also compare it with the syllabus, because the syllabus gives you more detail. People keeping up with their secondary literature assignment when they're the main poster is very important, because in the past I've had students not do that. And then that causes problems for all the other students who have to respond to it. So we don't want to do that. Another thing is, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself to me in the forum, and I'll send out that forum to you as well, because I'm kind of interested in where you're coming from. In the past, when I've taught this, I don't have a lot of students who have a background in ancient and medieval political thought, which is of course fine. I'm a, I've been teaching this for a long time, and honestly, if I'm teaching it at the graduate level or the undergraduate level, the default is that students don't want to really take this class for the subject, and it kind of fits into something they need to do because it's kind of an odd subject, and that's okay. So if you're excited about the subject, that's fantastic. And if you're not, then that's okay too. The best way to think about ancient and medieval political thought is about a story of humans, right? And how humans have worked through big questions that we still have throughout time that we're still trying to answer, and that we may have different answers to, but we can also learn from them. You need to have low anxiety about the texts. I'm saying that because I remember my experience of graduate readings of ancient texts and medieval texts and of secondary literature sometimes just be like, whoa, this is too much. It's not making sense. It's crazy. You should just expect that in some cases. And you shouldn't feel bad about it. What you need to do is to sort of figure out what's not making sense to you and talk to me or other people. And you'll notice that if you spend more time with a thinker and more time doing this, the language and structure will become more normal for you if you don't have a lot of experience with political theory. Political theory is philosophy, but there's also a lot of history and culture involved. And I always suggest to everyone who reads it that you read it. It's an argument, but read it like a story, an argument in a story form, to try to understand how it's unfolding. I really discourage you from using reading aids, like from using the Oxford Handbook to whatever, the little Oxford Handbook to Plato or something like that. It's not that those are necessarily bad. It's that these are texts that are for interpretation. And there are millions of interpretations of all these texts. What I want you to do is to begin to find your own interpretation. And if you're leaning too heavily on reading guides, you may unknowingly get into areas of scholarly debate that are not resolved or that rely on other texts to make their argument. So it can kind of just get too big for us. We're really narrowing in here. And I think in the long run, you'll find that that's more helpful. Okay, so if you still have questions, let me know. I'll be looking forward to your introductions to me and to each other. And I hope that you're doing well. Take care.